Welcome to the channel. Apologies, it's been a couple weeks since my last video. I've had to travel a lot to work, play poker, and some personal travel as well. So it's been approximately 3 weeks. Over that period of time, I've played about 10 sessions, and good news, we made money. So, feeling positive, still digging myself out of that 20K downswing that I started the year on, but we're heading in the right direction. In today's video, I'm going to focus on a 10, 25, 50 session that I played in a public casino that was hosting a tournament series. So in this session, really just want to highlight 3 hands that I played and focus on a theme that I felt reoccurring during this session of mistakes compounding. I felt like I made a few mistakes in this higher stakes game against better players that led me into situations I really wasn't all that comfortable in and ultimately led to a losing session. So I'll waste no further time. We'll jump into the hands. Okay, the game is 10, 25, 50 at a public casino. I'm in early position and I wake up with King 10, 9, 3 double suited, and I open for $200 over the $50 straddle. It folds around to the button and he 3 bets me to $700. It folds around to me and now I have a decision to make. So given that we were heads up, I elected to call. Get to play the pot heads up. I have a decently smooth hand with the double suited King 10, 9, 3. However, this was the second mistake I made in the hand. The first mistake was opening the King 10, 9, 3 from early position. I think I can get away with this a lot when I'm playing in smaller stake games or in some of these home games. But, a 25-50 game in a public casino, you're playing against a lot of pros. I think it's more important to respect your pre-flop ranges. And I was a little out of line opening this hand under the gun. And then once getting 3-betted, I was given the opportunity to fold, but I continued to double down on the mistake and called the 3-bet. So here we are to the flop, and the flop comes 8, 7 deuce with 2 hearts. So for my hand, obviously this is an amazing flop. I flopped the open-ended straight draw, second nut flush draw, and a heads up pot. I'm feeling pretty good about this hand at the moment. And for context, we started the hand with approximately $5,000 effective, or I had 5,000 and the 3-better has me covered on the button. So with $1,400 in the pot to begin, I could go with a lead here and just go pot. And then on the turn, depending on the turn card, I'll have a little bit less than full pot. And I can just get all my money in and we're going to see all the cards anyway. This was an option I considered, but I thought a better option would be, uh, you know, if I check and my opponent bets, I can go for a check raise. As the pre-flop 3-better, they shouldn't have a lot of very strong heads on 8, 7 deuce. And given that I have the king of hearts, it's a little less likely that I'll be running into kind of the ace high flush draw, which would be the worst hand for me to be up against. Additionally, if he is just continuation betting, sometimes I just get him to fold, which with me having king high would be a great outcome. And if we have to get all the money in, my plan is to get all the money in anyway with the lead strategy. So I just felt like check raising gives me the greatest chance of winning the pot on the flop and capitalizing on potentially my opponent folding. So I check, and my opponent bets $800. So essentially 2/3 pot. Um, you know, and I think when the action comes back to me and he makes this bet, you know, as played, I don't really think there's much of an option, right? If I were to call, how do I navigate on turn cards? I don't have enough money to really just flat and see a turn card and out of position. He's just going to check back if the board changes. So for all the reasons I mentioned earlier, I decided to go ahead and just pot here and try to see if I can force a fold. So he bets 800. I pot which is not quite enough for me to get all my money in. But regardless, he instantly goes all in, and I'm like, fuck, I'm in bad shape here. Maybe he has aces with hearts, or somehow he flopped a set or a wrap. I just didn't really feel like I was in a good spot. Anyway, we call it off. The turn card is a very good card for me. It's a king of clubs. So now I have top pair to go around with my straight draw. And the river is a queen of clubs. Not a great river for me. My opponent turns over ace, queen, 7, 8. And I'm sitting there with a pair of kings. And he wins the pot. So, as played, I think when I get this flop with that hand, I'm not disappointed with my decision to get all the money in there. I think the money has to go in once you see that flop. But, with the theme of compounding mistakes, you know, I opened too wide from under the gun. I defended the three bet with too wide of a hand. And, against this player was a relatively good player. He seemed to be a professional. I had never played with him before, but I could just tell by the way he handled himself that he's a professional. Um, when you're playing against better players, you need to respect your pre-flop ranges a bit more. And getting out of hand pre-flop just gives me a flop that I think I have to go with. But this is the mistake that inexperienced PLO players make, and I shouldn't be making this mistake. Is, if you play too loose and then you flop a hand you think you have to go with, then you end up going with it and you end up playing a 10k pot with king 10 9 3, right? And I could have avoided that situation by just being more thoughtful at the beginning and being more disciplined with my hand selection. And also thinking about my opponent, right? My opponent's a smart player. He's a good player. If he's 3-betting me pre-flop and then betting on 7-8 deuce, he knows that I know that this isn't a hand that he should have a strong hand on. He's not going to be betting this board with hands that he's not willing to stack off with if we're only playing 100 effective, right? Like in a 3-bet pot on this board, if he has the higher cards, he's just going to check back a lot and then put action in on the turn. So by me check raising his hand there, I should have been knowing that if he's betting this flop, he's prepared to call off, especially for such a large size. Maybe if he bet a little bit smaller, the 3-bet or the check raise would have more merit. But as played, I think these were clear mistakes that could have been avoided just being a little more disciplined pre-flop. And then once I arrived in this situation, I find myself playing a really huge pot with a marginal hand. And this is why PLO games can be good, right? Because people play too many hands, people get themselves in situations that feel like they have to continue, and I was guilty of that in this hand. Okay, hand 2. Again, we're playing 10, 25, 50 at this public casino. After getting stacked in the previous hand, I've reloaded. I'm in for another 5,000. If you love PLO like I love PLO, do the right thing. Take a moment to hit the subscribe and like button for more PLO content. And it folds around to me in the cutoff, and I look down at the 5, 6, 7, 8 single suited. So I open for $200. I get called by the button, small blind, then goes for a 3-bet of $800. Action folds around to me. I think with the 5, 6, 7, 8 here, obviously you'd prefer for this to be double suited, but I think I'm just going to call here in position all the time. It's just such a smooth hand, and it's going to flop very well, very often, especially against a high card small blind 3-bet range. So I call, and the button calls behind. So with approximately $2,400 in the pot, we get a ace high board of ace 4 5. The small better wastes no time and open pots, and the action's to me. So I think there's really no decision here. I mean, when you call the 3-bet with 8 high and you flop the wrap on a rainbow board, the money's just going to go in, and fuck it, we're gambling. So I go all in. The button folds. The small blind insta calls. and he flips over aces, and the board runs out three of spades, queen of clubs, and we just make the nuts and get the money. So this was a good outcome. Um, I think the way the hand was played, it was kind of inevitable, right? In late position, I'm always going to open the perfect 8 high rundown. You flop a wrap. The guy could have showed me aces. I still would have happily put all the money in, especially with the third player in the pot. So you had the dead 800. Um, yeah, so this hand pretty much played itself, and it was a nice hand to recover the mistake that I made in the previous hand. And now we're sitting right at even with about a $10,000 stack. The final hand from this session that I wish to share, again, we're playing 10, 25, 50, and I am under the gun with the ace 10, 8, 6 double suited. I think this is a clear open. So I open to $200 and I get called in two spots, the small blind and the straddle. So essentially there's $600 in the pot as we go to a flop. Uh, the flop comes ace 10, 8 with two hearts and the ace of diamonds not being a heart. So the action checks around to me, and this is where I made a mistake in this hand. Um, you know, I kind of was just autopiloting, right? I flopped the mirror. It's a fairly good flop for my hand and my actual hand. Like, I almost certainly have the best hand at this moment. So without thinking, I just kind of auto bet 2/3 pot. I bet 400. And the small blind tanks for a bit, and he check raises to 1800. And the straddle folds, and the action's to me. So now I have a decision. Um, you know, the player who raised is a player who I've played with quite a lot. He's very aggressive. He is a professional poker player. He travels all around playing, and we've played together in probably 2 or 3 different states. And I know that his raising does not signify that he has a set where he has me crushed at the moment. But I know by his raising that he's going to empty the clip. And if I call, I need to be prepared to call down. So, you know, I also felt very confident that by him raising, he almost certainly has the ace of hearts, and he's going to bet every street, right? So, you know, I think it's unlikely he has the ace of hearts and ace 10, right, which is a hand that beats me, and I think it's unlikely he has a set, given that I have the 3 cards matching the board. So I just felt by him raising, he's saying he has like ace king jack, or ace jack 9, or ace 8 9 7, right? A hand that is for sure has the ace of hearts, probably has the nut flush draw, but probably only has the one pair and like a straight draw or a gutter ball to go with it. I mean, sometimes I'm just dead and he has ace 10 with the ace high flush draw, and I'm in pretty bad shape. But I just felt with this player, he's too good of a player to be folding 3 pair on this board. And if I get a good clean card, a good clean turn card, um, we can decide what to do on the turn. So as you could probably tell, I talked myself into a call. And I think it's the right thing to do against this player specifically. But I think the mistake that I made in this hand is when the action checked around to me, I should have been checking back, right? While I have such a strong hand of 3 pair on this wet ace 10 8 2 heart board, so you think you want to bet to get some hands to fold, but I should be playing pot control here, right? Like, while my hand is very strong, unless the turn card is a very small offsuit turn card, the nuts are going to change and my hand is going to lose value. And I'm going to have to check back a lot of turns, or I'm opening myself to get check raised like I did in this scenario. So in retrospect, I think the mistake that I made here was I allowed the pot to get inflated by betting the flop when I had the opportunity to check back. And then on blank turns, I have a very strong top two pair and, can then play a big pot where likely, sometimes people double check and check raise on blank cards. So I could have had a strong hand. So I wish I had been smarter in that action. Additionally, uh, I got a second chance to consider folding, which, I don't think I can fold to that opponent specifically, but maybe I could, because if he's check raising on this board, he always has the ace of hearts, right? So even if he just has the ace of hearts and like two over cards that give him a gut shot straight draw, I think I'm a mathematically an underdog against that hand, right? My hand cannot improve unless the board pairs. And so many of the other cards that could come uh, likely hurt my hand and my hand shrinks in value. So anyway, I called the bet, but with all that being said, I could have checked back and I could have folded. But regardless, I called the bet. We're here. The pot's $4,200 and the turn card is a two of clubs. So the turn card is as blank of a turn card as you could get. I am extremely excited and we're ready to go. So the turn card's a two of clubs. As I expected, this player, he did not raise the flop to give up. So he bets $3,500 into a pot of 4,200. So essentially he's going for it. And for context, we started the hand with $10,000 effective. So there's still money to play for. A reasonable amount of money to play for behind this bet. So with the deuce of clubs, and he's betting 3,500. Once we call on the flop and we get this turn, there's no decision. We have to call. The one thing I considered was maybe going all in on this card. And in retrospect, if I'm being honest with myself, and this is highlighting an issue that maybe I'll start to discuss in another video, but the reason I didn't go all in on this turn card is I started the hand with $10,000 effective. This casino, you can only run it one time. And I didn't want to play a $20,000 pot, right? That's the only thing that I can objectively say for why I didn't go in all in on this turn card. And I think that's an interesting learning for me and something I'm starting to think about is I wonder if I am playing different when there's a $50 straddle and it impacts, because if it were a $2,000 bet, I wouldn't have cared. I would have gone all in and just ripped the money in. But given that this was, would have led to a $20,000 pot, did I really want to play such a big pot here with one card to come with no way of improving? And I don't know. Like, I'm not sure if it was a money issue. I'm not sure if it was one of those scenarios where I'm either way ahead or way behind. And by just putting more money in, like, I'm not accomplishing anything. So I don't know. That's up for grabs. But I think if I'm playing correctly and I'm talking about mistakes compounding on themselves, I would have liked to jam this card because it was a clean card. If I had the best hand on the flop, I have the best hand on the turn, and I should just be jamming on the clean card, and whatever the river is, the river is. But regardless, I called the 3,500. Now there's $11,000 in the pot. I have about $4,000 behind, give or take. And the river card is the beautiful Queen of Hearts. Now, my hand is just fucking dead, right? I think on the turn, I probably likely had the best hand. I think on the river, there is no hand I am beating at this point. And my opponent, he goes all in. And the actions to me. So if you think about my thought process from earlier in the hand, I'm 100% sure my opponent has the ace of hearts. The hands that we're beating are like ace, king, queen, ace, king, jack, that has the flush draw, straight draw, etc. Well, with this card, if he was bluffing with the ace of hearts and a straight draw, he made a straight. If he had the nut flush draw, he made the nut flush. And, me sitting here, no hearts, no straight cards, it's a clear fold. So I instantly folded. And yeah, I lost a decent amount of money in that hand. And, no other insightful hands from that session. Yeah, so in retrospect, after reviewing this session, one of the things that I've taken away from this session is that, our mistakes compound on each other, especially when you are playing better players, which tends to be the case when you play higher stakes games. In this scenario, I made the mistake of, not checking back a wet board with a vulnerable strong hand. Instead, I've inflated the pot and allowed myself to put a lot of money into a pot where my hand can't improve. And I think that's a mistake that I'm smart enough to not make. Additionally, just playing too loose pre-flop out of position is another huge mistake, right? That's how most PLO players lose a lot of money. So for me to fall into those traps that, I play a hand that can only flop second best hand, I think that was also a pretty massive mistake. So thank you for watching. I think if there's anything to take away from this video, it is to respect your pre-flop ranges, respect your checkbacks when you should, and be aware that, as you're playing higher stakes games, these mistakes that seem so small, they compound on each other and lead to really big pots and big river decisions where you're playing with hands that, maybe if you were a little more thoughtful and thought ahead a bit more, could have been avoided. So thank you for watching. I appreciate the continued support. Sorry for the delay between this video and the last video, and hope to do better going forward. Thank you.